Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 19th of September 2024. I'm super angry because I've just done a 45-minute video and it was pointing at the wrong screen and I'm having to re-record the whole thing again. So I'll rush through it even more quickly than I did previously. Okay, Ukrainian, I've got so much content to do today. I've got a live stream at 5 o'clock with Brendan Kelly from Turchny talking about civilian strikes on Russian strikes on Kherson civilians. So please check that out when it comes. Okay, Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. We've got an uptick in tanks and AFVs from what we have seen, although it's below average in AFVs, above average in tanks. 14 tanks, 13 AFVs, 1,130 personnel lost, which is a fairly significant number. 23 artillery systems, above average but below what we have seen. 1 multiple launch rocket systems, no special equipment, and 55 pieces of 55 vehicles and fuel tanks. So a little bit up and down there, all things considered. I think that is possibly showing that the Russians are still attacking. Losing 14 tanks shows that the Russians are on attack, and obviously Pokrovsk, Kursk, and Vuhledar are still really hot areas. That goes both ways in Kursk, though, of course, because the Ukrainians are on the attack there as well. So we've got 2 days worth of lost stats coming from Andrew Perpetua. 2 days ago, it was pretty much parity here between the two sides. Ukrainians losing an ANTPQ 50. These are, and they've lost 2 in 2 days. There's another one to come on the list after this. These are small radars. They operate on the L-band lightweight counterfire radar, capable of detecting and tracking rockets, mortars, and artillery shells. The radar is a further development of the NTPQ-48. It's mountable on towers, tripods, or light vehicles such as Humvee. Elevation coverage is 0 to 30 degrees. So light radar, it's not like a huge whole radar system that you might get for a Patriot battery, but losing them is obviously going to be annoying for the Ukrainians. So they've lost 1 in this list and 1 on the next one. Almost everything destroyed or abandoned or captured here, which is a shame. So the proportions are not in favor of the Ukrainians here, with only 1 damaged APC. We've got a whole host of APCs. Some of these, 4 of them captured. Well, 1 AFV and 3 APCs. So one of those is 2 M113s here. I've seen, I think, footage of the Russians capturing an M113 with a turret on top, which is definitely a modified M113 because they don't come with like a Browning machine gun turret. So I saw that one in the woods. I think that was a captured one. But yeah, 4 vehicles captured. That's a shame. It's a zero-sum game. So if you lose your vehicle to the other side, they gain it. The captured is the worst one here because your loss is their gain. Okay, but other than that, tank, IFV. We've got all the usual kind of equipment, but nothing too serious. And civilian vehicles, they're mainly destroyed, pickup trucks predominantly. And then the Russians haven't lost too much here. A command and control vehicle, that might hurt a bit with the intel on board. And if they have personnel, high-ranking personnel on board, then that could be a problem. That's destroyed. Artillery damage, and the rest is destroyed or abandoned. Couple of tanks, 3 IFVs, and 3 APCs, usual sort of trucks and civilian vehicles, etc., etc. So nothing to shout about there particularly. Then when we come to today's or the latest loss list, the Russians are losing maybe 3 times the amount of equipment that the Ukrainians are, but that's mainly coming from the trucks and civilian categories. When we look at combat losses, it's about 1 to 1. So let's look at the Ukrainian losses here, and we have another ANTPQ 50 taken out by Lancet. I would assume that's on a tripod, unless they just it might have been, say, on an MRAP, and they've listed both of those. But no, there's no Lancet thing, so it could be on its own on a tripod. 3 infantry fighting vehicles, 1 destroyed Marder there, and a damaged Bradley, and a destroyed BMP-2. That's what you're going to expect if you see, and MRAPs as well, if you have the Ukrainians on the attack, which I think this indicates that they are mounting those counterattacks still up in the Kursk direction. A lot of Western provided and indigenously made equipment, such as Strikers, Kirpis from Turkey, Cossacks from themselves, made themselves, Max Pros, Humvees, Bradleys from the US, Marder from Germany, so on and so forth. Then when we come to the Russian losses, surveillance and comm equipment, quite a bit of that. We have an artillery piece destroyed, most things destroyed or abandoned. 4 tanks, including a track guard and shed, 4 IFVs, some APCs as well, trucks, ATVs, and a lot of civilian vehicles as well. Quite a few trucks today. So yeah, worse for the Russians, I think, in terms of the massive equipment they've lost there compared to the Ukrainians. Now, we're going to come to the correspondent Sladkov, so a Russian mill blogger, stating that the losses of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region are 1 to 6 in terms of personnel and 1 to 30 in terms of equipment. Now, this is... I still get people coming to me saying, why are you not giving us the Ukrainian loss statistics? And it's because the Ukrainians don't produce the stats, and the Russians, when they do, they are so wildly fanciful as to be not believable. And therefore, I work hard to work out who has more accurate, who is closer to the truth, who has more accurate data. And the Ukrainians have far more accurate data. So that's why I talk about the Ukrainian losses. They produce it on a daily basis on a nice infographic, and I can talk through that. Now, we can take off 10% of that, but you still get the kind of trends, and then they kind of match up. There is some lag time, as you'd expect, but with the data that is released or that we find on social media. Okay, so the claim here from Sladkov is that the Ukrainians have been stopped. This is in the Kursk region. His attempts to find our weak points and counterattack are unsuccessful, and we are steadily moving forward, cutting through the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces. So that's what this Russian guy says. It's worth just reminding ourselves of what the Ukrainians are saying at the same time. So the Ukrainians are saying that the Russian offensive in the Kursk region has been halted. So they're saying the Russians have stopped. Russians are saying the Ukrainians have stopped. According to Ukraine's defense ministry spokesperson, Oleksiy Dmytrashkivsky, despite attempts to attack Ukrainian flanks, the situation is now stabilized, he emphasized. Interesting. And the Kremlin has aimed to a 5-to-1 troop ratio in its counteroffensive in the Kursk region, but this goal has not yet been met. Currently, around 37,000 Russian troops are in the area. That would indicate that maybe 10,000 Ukrainians are there. We'll come on to this a bit later. The objective is to expel Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region by October the 15th and establish a buffer zone along the border with Russia by October the 30th. In other words, the Kremlin has asked or demanded that Kursk is cleared out by the end of October, but actually it's looking somewhat stabilized, and the Ukrainians are attacking in a number of other places, and it's not looking like it's on course for those Russian objectives. Meanwhile, Sladkov here says the enemy's personnel losses compared to ours are 1 to 6. The enemy is losing equipment in relation to our losses 1 to 30. Our main task is to accept and destroy the enemy's reserves, maneuvering and not allowing them to dig in. So 1 to 30 equipment losses is simply not witnessed at all. There's no evidence of this, and if there's no evidence of this, then you're not justified in believing it, as far as I'm concerned, when we would expect to see evidence. It's not absence of evidence is evidence of absence. It is actually, in this case, it is exactly that. So often people decry that approach, but if you would expect there to be evidence and the evidence is not there, then that is evidence that hasn't happened. So that absence of evidence is really important for trying to build up an accurate picture of what's going on. We would expect to see social media evidence of 30 times the amount of equipment being lost by the Ukrainians than the Russians, if that had indeed happened, because we see every time the Russians have success, it goes on to social media. So if you're saying that we've got this amount of evidence of Russian losses, and then for each Russian loss, we should see 30 Ukrainian losses. That means we should see a couple of hundred Ukrainian losses just in a day. It's just absolute nonsense. So this is why we don't believe the Russians, because they say, like, if you're going to lie at least somewhat realistically. Don't go, oh yeah, they're losing them 1,000,000 to 1. They've lost they don't have 1,000,000. Yeah, they've lost 1,000,000. They make that out of Lego. It's just like, come on. Like, anyway, that's why I don't list the Ukrainian losses, because there is no accurate sense of it apart from looking at the socials, what's produced, what's published to the internet. This is why the work of the Touchny team of Andrew Perpetua is so freaking important. Because this is, and Oryx and others, but this is a really good indicator of what's actually happening on the front line. High losses of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Kursk region forced them, when urgent tasks arise, to consolidate the remnants of their battalions into one, to maintain combat readiness. The enemy has no order to retreat, has lost the initiative, having up to 30,000 in its group at its best moments. The enemy has proven to have lost more than 30% killed. Again, no evidence for this. Having 30,000, so the Ukrainians do not have 30,000 troops in that area. I'm fairly sure of that. So on and so forth. Now, yesterday I talked about the Wall Street Journal that reported that 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed. And that, 400,000 wounded? So the ratio was actually fairly good compared to the Russians, which was 200,000 killed and 500,000 wounded. So it was like the ratio of killed to wounded for the Russians indicates that if you're injured, you're more likely to die than if you're Ukrainian and injured. If you're injured, you're more likely to survive with Ukrainian. And that makes a massive difference. And the Russians, as a result, are losing a lot more troops. Now, those stats from the Wall Street Journal, which I think were probably, is so difficult to know. But anyway, I could have predicted this. So the Ukrainians were going to come out and say, no, it's inflated. So a Ukrainian official says the Wall Street Journal report on the 80,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed is being inflated or is inflated. The MP and Committee on National Security member Roman Kostenko says the plausible number is up to 50,000, while he didn't name precise data due to some personnel missing. So 50,000 with some missing. But is that 30,000? Probably not. But both sides are going to minimize the claims of losses. It's just what they're going to do. Our job is I see as my job is trying to work out who's closer to the truth. And we go back to our previous discussion. Okay. Now, when we try and build up a jigsaw of a picture of what is going on for each side, here's another data point. With an estimated 200,000 men killed, says Chris Owicki, so assuming the correctness of the Wall Street Journal claim for Russian losses, it's interesting to note that, and I'm not going to go through this, is a massive thread here, but there are cemetery mafias profiting from violently taking over cemeteries, funeral businesses, and even hospitals, attacking funerals and setting fire to rivals. Now, this would not be the case had there not been so many dead. Because there are so many dead people coming back to Russia, there is a lucrative business in the funeral business and the cemetery business, and that is being exploited by basically mafia groups that are making lots of money on this, which is just another data point to indicate that there are a lot of Russian dead. There are a lot of Russian dead troops, and it is more likely that the Ukrainian general staff figures are true when you piece together all of these data points into a jigsaw puzzle picture. Anyway, there you go. Interesting thread, goes into quite a lot of detail there about the dubious nature of funeral and cemetery goings on. Now, again, looking at other data points, I've talked about trends before in what we see being published on the internet, and we are seeing more POW footage coming out from the Ukrainians of Russian POWs being captured in the Kursk region, here the Glushkovko direction, suggesting that the Ukrainians are on the attack. When the Ukrainians were defending against the main counterattack of the Russians in the Kursk region, we weren't seeing POW videos coming out, and then they've started coming out again, and this is a reflection that the Ukrainians are attacking. One, it tells us they're attacking. Two, it tells us they're having some success, because we are seeing 2 days worth of quite a lot of POW footage coming out of the Kursk region, like we saw when they first started attacking into the Kursk Oblast initially. We saw reams and reams of footage of POWs being taken. There's just 3 straight away from this morning, and there's plenty more out there. Right, moving on to distance munitions. The Ukrainians had a really good night of success. 42 out of 42 Shahed drones intercepted. None of them taken down with electronic warfare or spoofed back into Russia. All of these were shot down, intercepted, and that is a 100% interception rate. That's excellent. 42 is a significant number again. The Russians are on consecutive nights sending over consistently high numbers of drones. Okay, 1 cruise missile out of 1 was taken down, and 0 out of 3 S-300, S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, missiles, sorry. These are used because they are so difficult to shoot down, often shot from quite close to the Ukrainian border, which means that the Ukrainians don't have enough time to react, and they slam into places like Kharkiv. So don't know where they hit. There is news that, there is shelling in all the usual places, villages around Zaporizhia getting hammered by the Russians. There are aerial bombs slamming into Kharkiv still. Reported by some media in Ukraine that one person has been killed in Russia's triple air bomb attack on Kharkiv. 2 others are known to be injured. That's a pretty substantial destruction taking place at what looks, well, who knows what the objective, what the target was and what was actually hit. But nonetheless, yeah, aviation doing its thing. Now, Russia is reporting that only 3 drones were launched by Ukraine and they were all shot down over Kursk and Belgorod regions. That's a Russian MOD. That doesn't really track with reality, whereby we see an explosion and fire near the Voroshilovsky Bridge in Rostov, the Sea of Azov, Berdyansk, Mariupol, and going along to Taganrog and Rostov-on-Don. So it's the southern border of Ukraine goes into Rostov. That's where we see, so not Kursk or Belgorod, where they're complaining of 3 drones. Here we've got an explosion at some warehouses. Witnesses reported hearing a sound resembling a drone before the incident. The Ministry of Emergency Situations confirmed that the fire initially started at a warehouse, followed by an explosion. And Russian authorities says Anton Gerashchenko reports all was fine at unidentified warehouses near Voroshilov Bridge in Rostov last night. But the videos tell a different story, and we see various explosions and fire going on there. So hopefully good news for the Ukrainians there. Now we're going to go back to Toropets, the massive explosion, the breaking news video I did of the huge explosion taking place some 500 kilometers plus from the Ukrainian border, or from where they would shoot any drones. Now, this was a massive event. There was another earthquake at Toropets in Tver Oblast, says Malcontent News. A magnitude 2.8 on a Richter scale. I reported that yesterday. That was at 5:56 Moscow time in the afternoon. That's 19 earthquakes from 2 to 2.8 after the drone strike. So you had a drone strike and you had 19 2 to 2.8 on a Richter scale earthquakes taking place due to the massive nature of the explosions at the ammunition depot. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Ukrainska Pravda reports that these attacks were done by the SBU, GUR, and SSO. But New Voice of Ukraine reports that more than 100 drones were used in the attack. This is exactly what I've been saying for bloody ages, which is don't have 100 drones and send them to 20 different places. 5 drones there, 5 drones there, 5 drones there. They shoot them down, a couple get through, one may do some damage, whoop-de-doo. Send 100 drones at one place and properly knacker it. When we saw those explosions, there were lots of complaints that it was a poorly manufactured ammo depot because those bunkers were too close to each other. It may not have been the case that they were too close to each other. It could have been that there was a lot of ammunition left outside and 100 drones hammered into all over that place, and that caused loads and loads of explosions rather than 5 drones hitting it and fire moving or explosions moving along the site from one place to another because of secondary explosions. This is exactly what Ukraine should be doing. Picking their target and taking that target out so it can't be used again. Not hitting a refinery with 1 or 2 drones, hitting a refinery with 50 drones. Pick a place, take it out. Pick another place, take it out. That's my approach. And anyway, people have been properly complaining about this, including Russians. So tens of Russians, maybe even hundreds actually. So 200 servicemen could have been there. That's what it can take. Tens of Russians military reportedly died in the strike on the weapons and ammo storage in Tver region. It may well have been being hit by Ukraine's new hybrid missile drone. More on that in a second. Criticism of the invaders' army has been widespread. Such as Zeb blogger here, Anastasia Kashavarova, says, in Toropets last night, the enemy blew up the largest arsenal of missiles of the Russian armed forces. How many more lies and mistakes can we make? How many times have we heard that it's enough to panic, it's enough to write something, enough to tell the Ministry of Defence and the General Staff that war is going on? So really, those who sit with calm faces and watch the explosions that look like mushrooms at least panic a little. The war is on, all caps, and we're screwing up one screw up after another. It is impossible to regard all this as the surrender of the country by an internal enemy. Yesterday, the DPR reported that there was another formation and an arrival there. Our servicemen were killed. So that could be an attack on training base or training that took out maybe 55 Russians, as I reported, possibly one of the ones I reported previously. Back in 2018, Bulgakov announced that only a utility block for 200 servicemen was provided in Toropets. How many of ours died there? And judging by the explosions and footage, nothing was left of the bodies. They lie and they make mistakes. They lie and they make mistakes. How much longer can this go on, guys? You have no brains and no conscience. Have you been processed? So really not happy about that. So someone says, on behalf of all Ukrainians, thank you, Yandex. So the Yandex is a Google equivalent in Russia. A friend of me sent me satellite photos of warehouses in Toropets in a personal message with high detail. Many were lying in the open and easily distinguishable, as in ammunition outside, missiles in one place, shells in another, etc. Ask him, where do you get all these photos in such high quality? Do you know where? Yandex and Google Maps. Bitch, I'm out of words on this issue. I just don't understand what's going on. Yandex Maps, damn it. So the idea is that this is available on open source intelligence, and you can see that they've got ammunition lying around outside. And if we can see that on open source intelligence, then the Ukrainians are certainly going to know about that. But yeah, that Kashavarova was actually longer. It had been slightly edited in what was said there. She also says, moreover, the authorities started lying right away. They tried to cover up the topic, hide the explosion of the largest arsenal of shells. One, an arsenal for the complex storage of missiles, ammunition, and explosive that meets the highest world standards, was destroyed by a drone fragment. So the idea that debris was all that started it off, that they shot all the drones down. This is what the authorities reported in the media. Two, Rodenia said that the fire is under control. Fire? Under control? How can you control the detonation of missiles? And the hell on earth is a fire? It's more than a fire. It's 2.8 on a Richter scale. So this is how the Russians lie. So we can talk about that in terms of the numbers they're reporting, in terms of what propagandists are saying. Here we got a propagandist or a mill blogger that's fed up with the lies, saying that this is just not helping, so on and so forth. So the truth is, she says, the truth is most likely they built this arsenal out of shit and sticks. Allocated funds were embezzled, estimates were adjusted, they exposed the location of the arsenal with their PR in the media. The exact location of the arsenal was recorded on Yandex Maps, and in fact there's no increase in security or transportation of ammunition due to the proximity to the border. Just absolutely incredible. She said, it's the third year of the special military operation and the idiocy is stable. 1. Formations in full view of the enemy continued. 2. Driving in columns without distance continues. 3. Storing all the shells in one place in full view of the enemy, both at the LBS and in the rear, continues. 4. Filming and publishing photos and videos confirming their hits for the Ukrainians continues. 5. Helicopters and planes are hidden in foil hangars or not hidden at all. And that continues. So real rightful indignation of what's going on there. Now, yesterday I reported to you this explosion and said that it sounds like a jet-propelled drone and not a propeller drone. But I said, but it's a bit odd because it's in the daylight and we know that the Tver Toropets was initially hit at nighttime. So what's going on there? And actually it's been geolocated to Bryansk. As someone said, doesn't sound like a drone. Ukrainian attack on a Russian base of the 856th Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment of the 144th Guards Motor Rifle Division. The base is located in the city of Pochep in Bryansk region. So there are these other strikes that take place that we don't necessarily know about. How many are taking place on any given night? Who knows? The Russians claimed there are 3 drones last night. We already know there's it seems like there's another drone attack in Rostov Oblast. What other oblasts were receiving drones and where there were strikes? Who knows? Right, satellite footage here of Mariupol area where ammunition depots were targeted over the last few days. So as well as that big one up in Toropets, we've seen Mariupol get targeted. There's a wide, extensive scorch marks across the landscape in these areas. Ukrainian rocket artillery effectively hit the targets, aided by favourable winds. Although we don't know what was destroyed there, we are actually seeing some images of these destroyed ammo depots in Mariupol with shells and rocket cases, or the actual shells and rockets there, showing that these were indeed ammo depots. So could have been a good couple of days for the Ukrainians in that respect. Right, let's go to... we've gone through these Kursk ones. We are going to look at this very briefly. The Russian propagandists have been advocating for the destruction of villages up in the Kursk region, evacuate them and level them, destroy them completely so that we get the Ukrainians. Yeah, surround and destroy them, says this propagandist on TV, with carpet bombing. Do you understand? I hope that this is exactly what they're preparing for. All this evacuation is for a good reason. Why else would they evacuate thousands of people? Same here. I agree with you, says someone else. I agree. It's my wish, scumbags, to destroy everything. So these that's not the person on TV. These people. That it's a talk show. Scumbags. These propagandists are advocating destroying our villages in Kursk. These people haven't been evacuated. They're still there. And this woman, that is destroy our villages. They are really upset, and rightly so, that sitting on TV, all these propagandists advocating for the destruction of these villages where they've lived their entire lives. And it's just the Russian approach to solving everything is just flatten everywhere and send in wave after wave of troops. Now, blackouts, to change the subject, blackouts are caused by Russian attacks have been driving Ukrainians abroad in larger numbers. So a UN report has come out today, UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission, has said that Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure has caused a sharp rise in Ukrainians citing blackouts as a reason for leaving the country over the summer. Now, I don't know whether these are men of a certain age leaving illegally and citing this, or whether these are predominantly women or men over the age of 60 giving this as a reason. Either way, you want to keep those people either for mobilization or for an active economy that is bankrolling the defense of Ukraine. So it's bad news that people are leaving in higher numbers to go and live elsewhere because of rolling blackouts. Now, fascinating stuff going on here. I won't play you the videos, but there's shootouts and whatnot. Okay, what's happening? So this is basically the equivalent of Amazon in Ukraine is called Wildberries. Now, for Amazon, Jeff Bezos, once the richest man in the world, had had a divorce from Mackenzie Scott, and lots of money had to be sorted out there. The equivalent of what's going on in Russia at the moment is, imagine Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott recruited armed gangs to fight gun battles for control of Amazon's corporate headquarters in Seattle. That's a level of craziness being displayed. So what's going on? 2 people were killed today or yesterday at the Wildberries headquarters in Moscow. It's the Amazon of Russia, the largest company in the country. The husband and wife co-owners are amidst a brutal divorce, with wife backed by Chechen warlord Kadyrov and husband backed by Putin's cronies. Each now has an army fighting for control of the company with police helpless. And there are fights going on and gunshots going off, and it's just, crazy footage of what's going on in Wildberries in Moscow. Just Russia is falling apart, possibly. Okay, now, if you want to feel really good about Ukraine's prospects at the moment, listen to these next bunch of points. But this is from David D, who is often very pro-Ukraine to the point of being bullish and maybe overconfident. Take all these claims with a pinch of salt, although I have reported a number of these. A number of these I didn't know, and I would like to know more about. So pinch of salt, everyone, but this will make you feel good about Ukraine's position right now. Some of what we know today, he says. One of the largest and newest ammo dumps in Russia was blown up. This has resulted in years of ammo production being removed from Russian servers. Yes, years. 2, a recon company for the 154th Russian Regiment was hit with a HIMARS rocket. 3, a training ground was hit with at least 55 Russian killed in action. 4, a platoon from the 47th Tank Division gave up to a few Ukrainian troops from the Azov Brigade. 5, the cement plant in Vovchansk, the aggregates factory, known to be held by the Russian 83rd Brigade and 2nd Spetsnaz, has fallen. Russians are shelling it now. 6, Russians are saying that in Kursk, the 51st paratroopers are taking heavy losses and are stalled. So that's Russians there. 7, the 21st and 95th Brigades are pushing into the rear. So those are Ukrainian grades pushing into the rear of the Russian 155th Marines. The Russians, are being engaged with Leopard 2A6s and other Western gear, and it's not going well for the Russians. 8, Russians on social media are saying that units near Bakhmut have no more troops and are using everything they have, mechanics, cooks, artillerymen, etc., just to hold the line. 9, the Mirage 2000s from France are coming. They are coming with air-to-ground capability and no restrictions. The first ones are less than 3 months out. Okay, I'm going to dwell on this for a second. This is a really good point. So we heard yesterday, I reported that these Mirage 2000-5Fs they're usually used to intercept other planes. These are being adapted to shoot to the ground. So they're being adapted to fire at ground targets. Now, if they have no restrictions, like the French, the British are cool with their equipment being used to strike deep into Russia, then you might get a situation where the Mirages are used to strike deep into Russian territory with some of their armaments. Now, it depends what they come equipped with and how close they can get to the border. I don't know, but that is really interesting. 10. The first German IFVs, so the Lynxes made in Ukraine, are less than 3 months out, so they should be churning out of the facilities by the end of this year. And of course, they're going to be making the APC, the Fuchs APC as well. 11. Europe just found another 500,000 155mm rounds. I've not heard about that one. 12. Ukraine is expected to hit 3 million drones this year, so they've gone up from whatever it was to 1 million in a year, and now they're looking at hitting 3 million within the next year. 13. Russians with the 1442 regiment are refusing to fight as infantry. 14. Russian state media is saying school children will be used to harvest food and fix railways due to the lack of people. 15. Russian state media is reporting that now defendants in crimes will be sent to the SMO till the court case comes up. So this is not sending convicts, but people that are just suspected of crimes, being accused of crimes. You are going to go to fight in the war until your court case comes up. This is klepto mobilization, under the radar, stealing people, sending them to the front line. Now being accused of something will send you to the SMO, not being convicted. 16. Many kids, conscripts, have given up in Kursk in the last 48 hours to Ukrainian forces. And 17. Reports from Russian troops on social media state that troops going to the front in the central region of Ukraine are only given 3 days of supplies. It's stated that that's all they will need. So there are arguments that things are not going very well for the Russians. Right, now we're going to have a philosophy sidebar. And this is important. Why am I going to do this? Because actually, we are always looking at data, and we all need to use the best tools we can to interpret whether data is what it seems to be, and what is the most probable explanation of any data that we see. Right, so I showed you what appeared to be a Russian sword sticking out of a Ukrainian POW dead on the ground. I didn't show you that, but you can go and see. There's lots of footage of it. And I was saying that there's no way that you're going to bring out a sword in a gunfight. Quite literally, you're not going to be stabbing this guy had you been in the middle of the contact line and there's a firefight going on. So this is almost certainly a Ukrainian POW has been stabbed with this ornate fantasy-like sword, and he's dead, and there's lots of blood, and it's not very nice. And I said this is an indication of how the Russians do things. Now, Loungelik here rightfully says, as in this is a good question, and it gives me a great opportunity to get philosophical. As for the execution by sword, how do we know that the soldier was not already dead and that he was later displayed as a trophy? And of course, we don't know. But it's very easy to present explanations of any data that are just conceptually possible. What you find happens a lot, and I get this, so the context of me telling you this is I've written heaps of books on whether or not God exists. And in my most recent book, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, I talk about exactly this process. So the context would be something like tsunamis killing 120,000 people, cancer, dementia, psychological debilitation, earthquakes, death, black holes, war, rape, murder, all of this, right? How can you explain this? It's called the problem of evil. How can you explain this if you're also saying that there is a God that exists that's all loving, all knowing, and all powerful? Is powerful enough to be able to do something about it, knowledgeable enough to know what to do about it, and loving enough to care to actually want to do something about it? Why is there still all this suffering? Okay, so it's a classic problem of evil. But for me, it's like, well, the obvious answer is that God doesn't exist. Okay, so what then happens is people then present, well, it could be this and it could be that, and you have these contorted arguments like, yeah, okay, that's conceptually possible, but what happens is people go from, and I don't want to get, this is not an argument about God, but this is about giving us the tools to deal with data. People will present to you explanations that are conceptually possible. This is kind of how conspiracy theories work as well, and they do this jump that goes from possible to plausible to probable to highly probable to actually what happened. But they don't justify that. They go, here's an explanation. It could be it could be what happened, therefore it is what happened. And what gets them from there to there is usually something called motivated reasoning. So motivated reasoning is why you are motivated to believe something. I want to believe that this is the case because actually, if I don't believe that, then my whole worldview falls apart, blah, 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 whatever. So I need this to be true. And therefore, I will go from possible to plausible. I had a debate against Lydia McGrew about the nativity on radio once, and she'd use this as an apologist. She used this all the time. She was just, this is what could have happened. Yeah, but it's completely implausible. You can't justify that is the most probable explanation of events if it's the least plausible explanation. You can't say that that's what happened if it has such a low probability. That you're simply not justified in believing the least probable explanation of events. But this is what's going on now. This is there's and I say here, you either need to provide justifiable evidence that this is the case, otherwise we can just claim anything that is physically possible. This is called phenomenal conservatism. So in philosophy, there's a position called phenomenal conservatism that states in epistemology, so the study of knowledge and truth, phenomenal conservatism holds that it is reasonable to assume that things are as they appear, except when there are positive grounds for doubting this. So it seems that something is the case. We are prima facie justified in believing it's true, just on seems and intuition, absent of any defeaters. And this is actually much more robust than you might think, because seems and intuition do a lot more than just like it's an intuition I pulled out my backside. So, for example, you could say to me, I think aliens live on the dark side of the moon. I say, well, it's conceptually possible, but my intuition is that there are no aliens there because I didn't see them, and prima facie, I think my intuition is more justifiable than your claim that aliens live there, absent of any defeaters. You've presented to me no evidence. There's no defeaters for my intuition that there are no aliens living on the back of the moon. You've got to defeat you've got the burden of proof for making this claim. So that you are making the positive claim that aliens live on the backside of the moon. You need to now justify that with evidence. You can't just say it's possible, therefore it's true. You need to say it's possible, and actually it's more than possible, it's highly probable, and it's highly probable because here's the evidence. And you can use things like Bayesian reasoning or whatever to get you from possible to probable to therefore justifiably believed, right? So when it comes to, so to take this back to the sword guy, it could be that he is a mannequin, or that he is already dead and then had a sword thrown into him, or it's a completely made up situation and it's an actor and whatever. Okay, or all that blood that looks insanely real, it indicates that this has actually happened. It's a guy that's dead with a sword sticking out of him. And then we need to use a bit of Bayesian reasoning. My intuitions aren't just plucked out my posterior. My intuitions are actually based on prior form. So the Russians have form for killing POWs. Check. Do the Russians kill people in creative and horrible ways? Check. Sledgehammers for Wagner people who have tried to desert, and people having their heads cut off, and all sorts of disgusting things that we've seen, that a sword sticking out of someone is absolutely within their wheelhouse. We have the form that this is not just possible, but it's now starting to move to probable. So when I see someone lying dead with a sword sticking out of them who appears to be Ukrainian, and this is kind of geolocated into a Russian position, and the claim is that the Russians have killed a POW because you're not going to be taking a sword into a gunfight, then my intuitions are justifiably true, absent of any defeaters. So if you need to tell me that some other explanation that's not prima facie, some other like prima facie upfront kind of, if you're going to make a different claim, the burden of proof is on you to provide justification for me believing that. And until I have that justification, I am justified in believing my intuitions based on the prima facie seemingly being true, or seeming to be true. And that is phenomenal conservatism. So, we're always building up a case for what is most probable explanation of events or of data. And are we justified in believing the Ukrainian general staff figures? Well, we go through and we look at the data all day, every week, every month, for the last 2 years. We've been looking at this, building up a case that the Ukrainian general staff are at least largely more accurate than they're wholly more accurate than the Russian MOD, and they are trending towards being a somewhat accurate representation of data. I can't say any more than that because there is a gap between all the evidence that we're presented with and the truth, and there always will be, and you're never going to get one-to-one evidence. So at some point we have to say, well, I have faith that it's at least somewhat accurate. I can't give you a number on how accurate. Take 3% off, 5% off, whatever. I can't give you that, but I'm fairly confident that believing the Ukrainian account is more justifiable than believing the Russian account. And in this case, of the soldier that appears to be dead with a sword sticking out of him, I think I'm justified in believing that it was a Ukrainian POW who was killed with the sword, absent of any defeaters. So really great question, gives us a good excuse to do some philosophy. I'd apply phenomenal conservatism here and also some Bayesian reasoning, looking at prior probabilities, to then apply that to this evidence and suggest that we are justified in believing that he was a POW that was murdered by the Russians with a sword. Anyway, hopefully that makes sense. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.